Cambridge Insider podcast time. Hello, everybody, and welcome to an episode of the Cambridge Insider podcast. As always, my co-host, Meg, how are you?
I'm doing great, Stephen. It's so nice to see you on this couple of days before Thanksgiving.
We're recording a couple of days before Thanksgiving. I believe Dean will release the episode towards the end of the week and next week, so it won't quite be Thanksgiving when it's released, but it is around the Thanksgiving time. Any specific plans in the Hawthorne home for Thanksgiving?
Yes, we're actually getting together as a big extended family, and there's a huge meal, and there is a big college football game. So we have a lot of plans, tailgating, the whole thing.
Nice. There we go. Just a little family time, a lot of eating. There is football on TV, just generally being thankful for what we have. So I'm excited to take a couple of days off, and I'm sure all of our different school partners and different colleagues in the US who are all deserving of a little holiday break. So if you are listening and you have already or will be enjoying that time off, enjoy it with your families. We'll be discussing
international students who are here studying. This is one of our biggest holidays of all, and it has its own menus depending on which family you're with and where you are in the country. So it's really an experience to be able to share for a long time coming, because it's one of our biggest deals.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. If you know anything about the US, if you've watched television that has to do with the US, you've heard about Thanksgiving. So to all of the international students, absolutely, Meg, rightfully so. Enjoy Thanksgiving, and if it's your first one, enjoy it even that little bit more. Exciting article that we're speaking about today, and I think it's a good stock article. We've discussed a lot of things the past couple of weeks on the podcast. I think this article, that we'll have executive producer Dean put on the show notes for us, which deals with the number of new enrollments in the country as far as international students goes, is a good stock article. Given that it's November, given that the new enrollment season is really kicking off, I think there's some interesting information that's coming out, in terms of the statistics that's very promising for the industry. Meg, your initial thoughts of what you read, and as I said, we'll put it on the show notes for all of our listeners.
I thought that one of the people who was quoted really, what he said hit home to me. He said, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not the next train. So I think that from the numbers that we're seeing that are coming out of this survey of almost 1,000 colleges, I think it was almost 900 colleges actually, we are seeing that there is an upward trend again. So it's going to take a while to adjust, I believe, but we are definitely heading quickly in the right direction as far as the numbers that came out for fall 21.
Absolutely, and I do think it's important to mention that, as you mentioned, there's a big sample size here, or close to 1,000 colleges. It is a study that in part was done by the U.S. Department of State, so a lot of the data that's coming through in the statistics are coming from the U.S. Department of State, and ultimately the article talks about a 68% increase from last year in terms of new international enrollments at the college level. Now, I think there are a couple of things to mention here. I think, we have obviously, we focused a lot on school enrollments on this podcast and at Cambridge Network. Generally, the trends that we see happening in college will translate to what we see in schools. And often the research is also lagging a little bit. So the research will first come out about colleges and later on come out about schools. But I think the fact that we are seeing a 68% increase this year from what we saw last year is a very, very positive sign for the industry as a whole, both college and school level. The second thing that I did want to say, just to situate yourself, you hear 68% increase and you might get overly excited. It is very positive, but it is a 68% increase from what we saw last year, which, as we all know, and we've spoken extensively about it, there was a significant decrease last year. Realistically, because of what happened with the pandemic, we saw that decrease. But again, I think this is very positive news, that both schools as well as students and people that are supporters of the industry should really take a little bit of heart from.
Yes, and I thought that the 68% was super important, not only because that is a significantly large number and a much larger number than the decrease was of new international students. Also, I think it's important because that also shows that people who had made a decision to come, we don't know what percentage of that number is true for, but that's got to include a lot of deferrals. So instead of putting a kibosh on their plans, they're just realizing the dream a little bit later, right? And I think we're going to see a lot of that. I thought it was very interesting also that from the sampling of schools that they did, the numbers were not universal. So a strongest portion, 70%, saw an increase, a significant increase. And 20% said they were kind of a little bit of a decrease, right? So there's an adjustment. One of the concerns that was brought up was that this may not be universal, and the stronger your reputation is, the more students you will probably adapt. That was also interesting that all of the schools surveyed, 77% of them said they're going to enroll the same amount of recruitment dollars as they had previously, and some are even doing more. So that's significant also because the largest markets remain the same. So really being able to speak to those markets and reinforce your position is now more important than ever, because again, it's starting to shift, and the more impacts that you can make or you have made in the past as far as your reputation, that's really what's going to catapult you, I think, to the next step.
100%. Couldn't agree more. I think it's important. And I think we're seeing a lot of what you just mentioned in our school population and partners as well, is that a lot of the established programs that have a certain reputation abroad, are doing well. We are seeing some of the emerging programs continue to sort of stall and struggle a little bit. And I think we need to take heart in the fact that there's still interest, because that means there's students coming. At this stage, it seems as if they continue to choose the established programs. But for those newer programs, for those programs that might not be as big or as established, take heart from the fact that students are coming and there's an opportunity there. You've really, as Meg said, now got to focus on, all right, we have students coming. How do I draw their attention towards me? How do I start building a reputation, building a brand abroad that's going to make me one of those elite programs? That's going to make me a program that when the market's a little bit down, I continue to thrive. And I don't want to delve too deeply into that because there are a couple other things that we want to talk about in this article, but certainly, that's what Cambridge does. That's what we specialize in, is building that brand for you, making sure that you can put your name out there and become that household name, which is so important, as we've seen, come through in the past couple of years. The other thing that I did want to mention, and I think this article is really well written because it does give us that hope. It's that, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, as Meg said, but it's, quoted from the article, but it's not a train, which is great. But there are a couple of words of warning, I would say, specifically about, hey, we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves yet. There are still some concerns from the international population. Meg, I'm gonna just call out these 4 concerns that are quoted in the article, and I'd love to hear your thoughts just in general. The first one is that the author, quotes somebody that he's interviewed who says the cost of education remains very high in the US. That's something that you and I deal with on a day-to-day basis with some of our schools. What are your thoughts there?
I think that now more than ever, we need to look at our competition as a school. You need to look at what your competition is doing, because we already know that part of your competition is from other countries, right? So they have a reputation as being less expensive than schools in the United States. So that being said, I think it's very important to know where you stand within your competition. What in your region, in your area, what are similar schools charging? Where, just from a purely price point, that's something that you may be able and probably can address. So to some level, and I think at any level that you can address that, it's very important now. So I think you really need to take an inventory of where you stand compared to everybody else. Again, when you're talking about international recruitment, you're talking about students who are really looking at a broad range of areas normally and a broad range of schools. So start in your specific region and then align yourself appropriately.
100%. And it is about not just in smaller regions, but I feel almost across the country, it's about being able to really show your value when it comes to cost. Yes, US education is expensive. We know that. And we do preach to a certain extent at Cambridge Network, try and lower those costs, because for people coming from outside of the country, they are expensive, and you will lose out, because the UK, Australia, Canada are examples of countries that are offering great value at lower costs. However, a part of, you can only lower your cost that much. We understand that there are budgets to be met. We understand that there, are certain numbers that you have to charge. In addition to lowering your cost, think about how you are projecting your value of your program. Comparing yourself, absolutely, as Meg said, to the school down the road, but also the other school, maybe on the West Coast, or on the East Coast, or in the middle of America, that offers a similar program. What value am I adding? Are they offering support that I'm not offering? In addition, how do I communicate what I'm offering to a potential student, to a potential client? If I'm just saying, come to me, I'm a great school that would take, you as a Vietnamese or Korean or Chinese student, that's simply not enough. You've got to be able to, in a nutshell, explain and almost, convince students that the value that you give through support, through academic support, through extracurricular programs, opportunities at the school level, that's really what you have to try and project when you do talk about your program.
I think that's super important and brings up a very, very good point, that in marketing, so many schools at any level are really concerned about the powerhouse points to families of SAT scores, matriculations, the different types of programming that are available. I think that's something that's very, very important, especially in light of this pricing question, is to articulate exactly what your services are for international students. International students' needs are often different to some extent. And so to be able to say to a parent or to a student, not only do you have all of these wonderful academic opportunities or extracurricular opportunities or sports opportunities, you also have this type of support that's exclusive to you. And that's something extremely important to express and to prioritize in your communications.
Yeah. So, and I think that ties nicely into, so I mentioned that the first concern in the article, that the author brings up or raises is the high cost. The second one, which we discussed inadvertently, was competition from other countries. And I think it goes without saying, too much of the discussion which we've had. The other two, I think, work quite nicely together, two more concerns. And I think they go back to how are you communicating? They are, tensions between the US and China, those geopolitical tensions we've seen now for, over 2 years between those two countries, has certainly had an impact on the industry and continue to be a lagging factor, rolling around the industry, specifically for students coming from Southeast Asia looking to come to the US. Am I safe? Am I allowed to be there? What does our two presidents fighting mean for me as a student there? These are important things that maybe to us sitting in North Jersey or Florida or Washington, D.C., we don't see every day, we don't think are as important, but they certainly are issues that we hear our students and families talk about. The fourth and final concern that the author raises is that the US handling of the pandemic. And, we've seen major strides being made in this country. And to a certain extent, which I think we're all very grateful for, the US has to a certain extent moved on and been able to have certain gatherings without masks. And we have a high percentage of people that are vaccinated. We've moved on, maybe, as a general public in the US, but certainly this is a very, very big concern. You can put yourself in the shoes of a mother and father sending their kid, thousands and thousands of miles away. They want to know from schools and communities, how are you dealing with the pandemic? Is my student or my child going to be safe? So those two together, I think, again, pinpoint schools, communicating. How are you addressing these issues? Even if they're not big issues for you, making sure that you address them, making sure that you can communicate them effectively to a potential student, to a potential family.
I agree 100%. And communication takes many forms. It can be lists of how our school is addressing the COVID crisis. What are our protocols? What are our procedures? And that can be so eloquently communicated through pictures or through videos so that people can actually see what students look like going about their daily school life, right? That expresses it so completely. And then as far as the international Titan question, the problems between our two countries, that's something that I think that as Americans and Americans in the education system, to be able to share news about our communities and about our school communities and about the inclusion within those communities. And again, to be able to show how that looks in a real life situation. All of that, it makes a very positive impression on our audience and on our potential clients. So I think it's really important to pepper your outreach with kind of daily life.
Yep.
At your school, so that people know that there is no fear here, right?
Yep.
There is no reason to be afraid. You're fully supported, and everybody's got your back.
Yep. And understanding as well, anybody that's ever visited Southeast Asia, there's a snapshot of US news that comes to Southeast Asia on a daily basis. And that snapshot, because of the idea of the media, is very rarely positive. So if you're a family that's sitting in northern China, you're not seeing the feel-good stories that so many of us see on a daily basis and that we're so thankful for. You see some of the more negative news, and that's the impression that often families get. The final thing I will say, we've spoken a lot about communication. We've spoken a lot about positioning yourself as a program to make use of the fact that we've seen the 68% increase in students. How do you position yourself? Yes, it's important to communicate and to effectively communicate to address these different things to make yourself a household name. But communication in itself is important, but also getting that communication to the right people. If you're a school that's partnered with an agency, critically ask yourself, how is the agency helping me to get this communication across? Are they, able to offer some kind of advanced communication, advanced marketing to be able to reach certain populations that I might not ordinarily get hold of in my day-to-day communication? Because again, that's simply the way this market has trended. We're seeing that more and more. It's not just about content. It's not just about what you say. It's about who you say it to. It's about access to the market. It's really become an access game. And if you don't have access to the market, you're going to struggle to get that message across. Meg, I like talking about articles like this. There's so many little nuances that we can discuss. Unfortunately, we run out of time. I'm going to ask you for some final thoughts. Any final thoughts from yourself as you and I head into a Thanksgiving weekend?
I think that this article was uplifting in that it really does point a positive direction for international recruitment and enrollment. I think that the 4 points that we discussed are super important to really consider and to really act upon. We mentioned earlier that 77% of these schools will continue with their budget and their recruitment. And the number one way that they're doing that is online events and social media. So if you want to reach your audience, really think about and research what is the best vehicle and a proven vehicle to get you in front of that audience. Because social media, as you know, is endless, right? So who can target you directly to where you want to go? And so that all of your efforts will be fruitful.
Well said.
And with that, I would like to wish you a wonderful holiday, and I'll be seeing you next week.
Excellent. To all of our listeners, happy Thanksgiving. If you only listened to this on Monday, we trust that you had a wonderful holiday. And we hope, as always, the Cambridge Insider podcast provides you with cutting-edge, useful information that you can use to make educated and informed decisions. We'll catch you around the next episode. Bye-bye, everybody.